The divorce papers landed on the mahogany desk with a soft thud that felt louder than thunder. Claire's hand didn't shake as she slid them across to Marcus. 7 years. 7 years of playing the perfect wife, and it all came down to this single sheet of paper with her signature already dried at the bottom. His signature space, still blank, because Marcus Bennett didn't know yet. Didn't know she'd seen everything. Didn't know she'd been watching for months. Claire had always been the kind of woman people overlooked. Not because she wasn't beautiful. She was. But it was a quiet beauty, the kind that didn't demand attention in crowded rooms. Her mother used to say she had sad eyes, even when she smiled. Maybe that's why Marcus had chosen her. She wouldn't fight back, she wouldn't question. She would simply exist in the margins of his ambition, funding his dreams with her trust fund, while he collected all the glory. The Bennett family had made that clear from day one. Marcus's mother, Patricia, had a smile that never reached her eyes. During their first dinner together, Patricia had touched Claire's hand with fingers cold as January frost and said, "You're such a sweet girl. So fortunate to marry into our family." The emphasis on fortunate hadn't been subtle. Neither had the implication. The Whitmore fortune was substantial. Old money, quiet money. The kind that opened doors without needing to knock. And Marcus, brilliant and hungry and drowning in student debt from medical school, had needed those doors opened. Claire told herself it was love. She told herself the way he looked at her during their courtship meant something. She told herself that the prenup her father insisted on was just precaution, not prediction. The wedding had been beautiful. Claire wore her grandmother's lace veil and carried white peonies. Marcus had written his own vows, his voice catching with what she'd believed was emotion. He promised to cherish her, protect her, never take her for granted. The guests had sighed. Patricia had dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and Claire's father had gripped her hand during the father-daughter dance and whispered, "It's not too late to run." She'd laughed, thought he was joking. He wasn't. Within 6 months of marriage, the signs appeared like hairline cracks in fine china. Small at first. Marcus working late. Marcus distracted during dinner. Marcus checking his phone during movies and turning the screen away when she glanced over. Then came the forgotten anniversaries. The business trips that extended without explanation. The perfume on his collar that wasn't hers. When she asked gently, always gently, he'd sigh with the exasperation of a man burdened by an unreasonable woman. "Claire, I'm building something here. Building us a future. Can't you just trust me?" So she did. She trusted him while he used her inheritance to expand his private practice. Trusted him while he hired staff and purchased equipment and opened a second location. Trusted him while her name appeared on every loan, every investment, every risk. Her money, his success. The Bennett family gatherings became exercises in endurance. Patricia would seat Claire at the far end of the table, next to Marcus's sister Jennifer, who spent entire meals discussing her children's private school achievements, while pointedly asking Claire when she'd finally give Marcus an heir. 7 years is a long time, Jennifer would say, her voice honey-sweet and laced with poison. People might start to wonder if something's wrong. Claire would smile, nod, say nothing about the fertility treatments Marcus had promised they'd start. The appointments he kept cancelling, the conversations about children he kept postponing. She didn't tell them that Marcus barely touched her anymore, that when he did, he closed his eyes like he was somewhere else with someone else, that she'd found herself crying in the shower more nights than not, wondering what she'd done wrong. Her friends from college had drifted away, not all at once, gradually. Invitations declined because Marcus had work events. Lunches cancelled because he needed her to handle something at the practice. Girls' trips impossible because someone had to stay home and manage the house, the staff, the details of a life that seemed to run on autopilot without actually going anywhere. Claire's father had offered her a position at Whitmore Enterprises multiple times. She'd always refused. Marcus had made his feelings clear about that. "We don't need your father's charity," he'd said, his jaw tight. "I provide for us just fine." The irony wasn't lost on her. He provided with her money, built his reputation with her family's connections. climbed social ladders using her as the first rung, but pointing that out would make her ungrateful, spoiled. One of those rich women who didn't understand hard work. So Claire had made herself useful in other ways. She organized the practice's charity galas, networked with potential investors at country club brunches, smiled until her face hurt at medical conferences, while Marcus worked the room and forgot she existed. She'd become very good at being invisible, at standing slightly behind him in photos, at laughing at jokes she didn't find funny, at pretending everything was fine while something inside her slowly suffocated. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, it was the hope. Every morning she'd wake up and think maybe today would be different. Maybe today he'd look at her the way he used to. Maybe today he'd remember why he married her. Maybe today she'd matter. But then she'd find him already gone, his side of the bed cold, a note on the counter about late surgery that she'd later discover never happened. The humiliations accumulated like interest on debt. At the hospital fundraiser, she'd overheard 2 doctors' wives discussing her. 7 years and still no children. Either she can't or he won't. Either way, tragic. At Marcus's practice, his nurse Rebecca would smile at Claire with pity that felt worse than contempt. Even the housekeeper Mrs. Chen had started leaving motivational quotes on the refrigerator about strength, about endurance, about things getting better. They didn't get better. Marcus started coming home later, sometimes not at all. His excuses became lazier. Emergency surgery became working late, became, I told you I'd be at a conference. He stopped trying to make them believable. Stopped caring if she believed them. And Claire, desperate and diminishing, started checking his phone. She hated herself for it, hated the woman she'd become, the suspicious wife, the paranoid shrew, all the things she'd sworn she'd never be. But something inside her screamed that she needed to know, needed proof that she wasn't losing her mind, needed evidence that her instincts weren't cruel lies her insecurity invented. She found nothing. He'd become too careful, or maybe she was just too late. Then came her birthday. 32 years old, Marcus had promised to take her to dinner, promised it would be special, promised he'd be home by 6. At 7, she sat alone at the dining table, candles burning down, expensive wine warming. At 8, she called voicemail. At 9, she ate a piece of the cake she'd ordered for herself and cried quietly so the staff wouldn't hear. At midnight, he came home, showered, didn't apologize. Just climbed into bed like nothing had happened. I got pulled into an emergency, he mumbled into his pillow. She didn't respond. Didn't point out that the hospital would have called if that were true. Didn't mention that she'd stopped by his practice earlier and the lights were off. Didn't say anything about the text she'd seen flash on his screen before he'd silenced his phone. A heart emoji and the words, "Can't wait to see you again." She just lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, and felt something fundamental break inside her. Something that had been cracking for years finally shattered completely. And in that moment, Claire Whitmore Bennett made a decision. She would know the truth, all of it, no matter what it cost, matter what. The truth came faster than she expected, and cut deeper than she'd prepared for. Claire hired a private investigator, not some shadowy figure from a noir film. Just a professional recommended by her father's attorney. A woman named Rachel, who had kind eyes and had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. "Most people know before they hire me," Rachel had said during their first meeting at a coffee shop, far from Claire's usual haunts. "They just need someone else to confirm it, to make it real." She was right, Claire knew, had known for longer than she wanted to admit. But knowing in your gut and seeing it documented in 8x10 glossy photographs were different animals. The photos arrived in a manila envelope 3 weeks later. Marcus and his office manager, Natalie, not his assistant, his office manager, the woman who handled payroll and insurance claims and whom Claire had met dozens of times. Natalie was 26, blonde, efficient, forgettable, except Marcus hadn't forgotten her. The photos showed them at restaurants, hotels, walking hand in hand through parks, kissing in parking garages. One particularly devastating image showed them exiting what the investigators' notes identified as an OB/GYN clinic. That photo came with a medical record Rachel had somehow acquired. Natalie was 12 weeks pregnant. Claire sat in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store she'd never been to and stared at that ultrasound image for an hour. A tiny blur that would become a person. A person Marcus would have with someone else. While she'd spent 2 years begging him to start trying. While she'd tracked ovulation and taken supplements and made appointments he never kept. While she'd wondered what was wrong with her that he didn't want children, except he did want children, just not with her. The sound that came out of her throat wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. It was something primal and broken that scared her with its intensity. A woman knocked on her window, concerned. Claire waved her away and drove home with tears she couldn't stop, and a clarity she'd never had before. She couldn't confront him, not yet. Because confrontation would mean explosion, and explosion would mean Marcus playing victim, and somehow, impossibly, she'd end up apologizing. She'd seen that pattern too many times. No. She needed a plan. Needed to be smart. Needed to protect herself because clearly no one else would. Her father's attorney, Richard Morrison, had handled the Whitmore family legal matters for 3 decades. He took one look at the photographs Claire spread across his conference room table and said, "You want a divorce?" It wasn't a question. "I want to understand my options," Claire replied. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, steady, cold, unfamiliar. Richard explained. The prenup was solid, but not ironclad. Most of Marcus's business assets were technically hers since she'd funded everything. The house was in both names. The practice was complicated because while her money had launched it, he'd built it. But the infidelity changes things, Richard said, especially with a child involved. Maine has no fault divorce, but fault can impact distribution of assets and alimony. You have leverage here, Claire. Significant leverage. She absorbed this information like a student cramming for an exam, asked questions, took notes, learned terms like marital misconduct and dissipation of assets and commingling of funds, discovered that her quiet, invisible years had actually been years of documentation. Bank statements showing her money flowing into his accounts, property deeds with her name, business licenses she'd co-signed. She was everywhere in his success story. He just pretended she wasn't. The next weeks were strange. Claire moved through her life like an actress playing a role. She smiled at Marcus over breakfast, asked about his day, attended a medical benefit at his side and laughed at appropriate moments while Natalie worked the registration table, her stomach not yet showing, her hand occasionally resting on her abdomen in a gesture Claire recognized because she'd imagined herself doing it 1,000 times. No one knew. Marcus certainly didn't suspect. Why would he? Claire had never fought back before, never questioned, never challenged. She was the good wife. The convenient wife. The wife-shaped prop in his increasingly impressive life. Except now she watched everything, noticed patterns she'd missed before. How he always showered immediately when he came home. How he kept his phone face down. How he volunteered for overnight shifts that didn't exist. How the practice's books showed expenses that didn't match the calendar. How many business dinners could one medical practice possibly need? The answer was none. They were all covers, all lies, all building blocks in a structure of deception so massive she marveled that it had taken her this long to see its full architecture. Then Claire got sick. Not seriously, just a flu that wouldn't quit. She spent 3 days in bed, weak and nauseous, and asking Marcus if he could stay home just for 1 day, just to make sure she was okay. "I can't," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "I have patients depending on me." He left. She called Mrs. Chen to bring soup, and then, alone in their bedroom, she noticed something. Her period was late, very late. Claire's hands shook as she drove herself to a pharmacy in the next town over, bought 4 different pregnancy tests, took them all in a gas station bathroom because she couldn't wait. All positive. She was pregnant. After years of trying, of hoping, of wondering what was wrong with her, she was finally pregnant, and her husband was in love with someone else who was also carrying his child. The cosmic cruelty of it stole her breath. Claire sat in that gas station bathroom and laughed until she cried and cried, until she laughed, and couldn't tell the difference anymore. She drove home in a daze. Should she tell him? Would it change anything? Would he leave Natalie? Would he want to leave Natalie? Did it matter? Did she even want him anymore? That question stopped her cold. Did she want Marcus? Or did she just want to not be alone? Want to not be the woman whose husband cheated? Want to save face in front of the Bennetts and her parents' friends and everyone who'd watched her try so hard to make this work? She decided to wait, to think, to figure out what this meant. But her body had other plans. 4 days later, Claire woke up to cramping, then spotting, then bleeding that scared her. She called Marcus. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Texted, "I need you. Emergency, please." Saw the read receipt. No response. She drove herself to the hospital, bleeding through her clothes, terrified and alone. The ER doctor was kind. Too kind. The way people are when delivering devastating news. "I'm sorry," she said. "There's no heartbeat. It happens. First trimester miscarriages are common. It's not your fault." But it felt like her fault. Felt like punishment. Felt like the universe confirming what she'd always suspected, that she wasn't enough. Wasn't worthy. Wasn't meant for happiness. The doctor offered to call someone. Claire said her husband was on his way. He wasn't. She waited 4 hours in that hospital room, going through the physical trauma of losing a child she'd barely known she was carrying, and Marcus never came. Never even called. She discharged herself, drove home, found Marcus in the shower, humming, happy, unburdened. "Where were you?" she asked. Her voice sounded dead. "Working late," he said without looking at her. "I told you I had surgeries." He hadn't told her, and there were no surgeries. Rachel's report from that day would later show him at Natalie's apartment from noon until 10 p.m. He'd been choosing baby names while Claire lost their child alone. Something inside Claire didn't just break. It cauterized, sealed itself off, became scar tissue too tough to hurt anymore. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy, didn't tell him about the miscarriage, didn't tell him anything. Just went to her lawyer the next morning and said, "I want to move forward, I want everything." Richard understood. He drew up papers, detailed, devastating papers that outlined every asset, every investment, every dollar Claire had poured into Marcus Bennett's dream. He included the infidelity, the pregnancy, the medical records from Claire's miscarriage that happened while her husband was with his mistress. "This will destroy him," Richard warned, publicly, professionally, financially. "Are you sure?" Claire thought about 7 years. About invisible tears and swallowed words. About birthdays forgotten and promises broken. About lying alone on a hospital bed while her body rejected a child and her husband rejected her. About being erased and overlooked and diminished until she'd almost forgotten she was a person who deserved better. "I'm sure," she said, and meant it. Claire began her metamorphosis in the smallest ways. Ways Marcus wouldn't notice because he never really looked at her anyway. She started with her wardrobe. Not dramatically. She didn't show up in leather and red lipstick like some Hollywood revenge fantasy. She just stopped wearing the soft pastels Patricia had once said were so becoming on you, dear. Started choosing black, charcoal, deep navy, colors that said she wasn't trying to disappear anymore. Marcus didn't notice, but Patricia did. At Sunday dinner, her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed slightly at Claire's black sheath dress. "You look different," Patricia said, and it wasn't a compliment. "Do I?" Claire replied, her voice mild. "I feel exactly the same." Except she didn't. She felt like a woman waking up from anesthesia, the numbness wearing off to reveal exactly how much damage had been done. And she was done pretending she didn't feel it. Next came her schedule. For 7 years, Claire had organized her life around Marcus's needs. His practice hours, his social obligations, his convenience, no more. She started taking morning meetings, lunch appointments that ran long, entire afternoons blocked off for unspecified engagements. "Where were you?" Marcus asked one evening when he came home to an empty house and no dinner waiting. First time in years he'd even noticed. "Out," Claire said. "I had things to do." "What things?" "Just things." Her tone was pleasant, final. She didn't elaborate, didn't justify. For 7 years she'd explained every moment of her day like a child seeking permission, She was done with that too. The truth was, Claire had begun reclaiming her life piece by piece. She'd reconnected with old friends, Emma and Sophie and Jade, women she'd abandoned for a marriage that hadn't wanted her anyway. She'd expected judgment, received forgiveness instead. "We've been waiting," Emma said over wine at a restaurant Marcus would never go to. "Waiting for you to come back to yourself," Claire cried. Not sad tears, relieved ones. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to matter, to take up space without apologizing for it. She started going to the gym, not to lose weight or please Marcus, just to feel strong, to inhabit her body as something other than a decorative failure. Started taking boxing classes where she could hit things and no one asked her to be gentle or quiet or accommodating. The instructor, a woman named Sam with scarred knuckles and a direct gaze, watched Claire attack the heavy bag with intensity that bordered on fury. "Who are you fighting?" Sam asked. "Myself," Claire answered, "the version that put up with this for so long." Sam nodded, then hit harder. She did, and most importantly, Claire went back to work. Not at her father's company where Marcus could claim nepotism, at a non-profit, an organization supporting women leaving difficult situations. The irony wasn't lost on her. The director, Maria, was a survivor herself, recognized something in Claire during the interview. "This isn't just about wanting a job, is it?" Maria asked. "No," Claire admitted. "It's about remembering I'm capable of something besides being someone's wife." "Then welcome," Maria said. "We need people who understand." Claire threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. Fundraising, event planning, direct client support. She was good at it, better than good. And for the first time in 7 years, people saw her as Claire. Not Mrs. Bennet, not Marcus's wife, just Claire. A person with skills and intelligence and value that had nothing to do with her last name or her bank account or her willingness to be ignored. Marcus noticed she was gone more. Didn't notice she was different. That was his fatal flaw. He'd stopped seeing her years ago. To him, she was furniture, background noise, a problem solved. He had Natalie for excitement, Claire for stability. The best of both worlds, or so he thought. He had no idea he'd left his back undefended. Claire's lawyer had been busy, quietly busy. Richard had frozen accounts, filed preliminary motions, built a case so thorough it could be taught in law schools. He'd coordinated with Claire's father's financial advisors to untangle every investment, every asset, every dollar that rightfully belonged to the Whitmore family. Most of Marcus's success was built on Claire's foundation. Remove that foundation, and the structure collapsed. "When we file, it will move fast," Richard explained during one of their weekly meetings that Marcus knew nothing about. "He'll try to fight. They always do. But we have everything documented, every affair, every lie, every time he used your money for his career while refusing you basic respect. And Claire, the baby Natalie's carrying, that's going to be expensive. Child support, medical costs. If we time this right, he'll be responsible for a child with Natalie while losing everything he built with your money. He'll be destroyed." Claire thought about the word destroyed, thought about 7 years of her life, about a miscarriage she'd suffered alone, about a husband who'd broken every promise he'd ever made. "When can we file?" she asked, but she wasn't ready yet. There was something else she needed to do first, something for herself, not revenge, closure. Claire had kept a box hidden in the back of her closet for 7 years. In it, every love letter Marcus had written during their courtship, every Valentine's Day card, every anniversary gift receipt, every promise captured in ink and paper. She took the box to the fireplace one evening when Marcus was working late, sat cross-legged on the floor like a child, read through every word he'd written, every promise he'd broken, every future he'd painted that never came true. And then, one by one, she fed them to the flames. Watched the paper curl and blacken, watched 7 years of delusion turn to ash. When she was done, she sat in the dark and felt empty. But it was a clean empty. The empty of a room finally cleared of clutter. The empty of space waiting to be filled with something real. She heard Marcus come home after midnight, heard him pause in the doorway of the living room, saw him silhouetted in the darkness. "What are you doing?" he asked. Sitting, she said. In the dark. Why? Thinking. About what? Everything. He waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. Eventually he shrugged and went upstairs. Didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't notice the ash in the fireplace. Didn't sense the shift in the air. The next morning Claire made him breakfast, smiled, kissed his cheek, played the role she'd perfected. But inside, behind her eyes, something predatory had woken up. Something patient. Something that knew exactly what it was doing. The final preparation came from an unexpected source, Claire's father. Robert Whitmore had watched his daughter diminish herself for 7 years, watched her marry a man he didn't trust, watched her pour her inheritance into someone else's ambition, and he'd said nothing because she'd asked him to. But in his office one afternoon over tea, neither of them drank, he finally spoke. "I know what you're planning," he said quietly. Claire didn't pretend. "How?" "I'm not stupid, neither are you, though you've been pretending to be for too long. Richard keeps me updated, I approve of everything he's doing. But Claire, I need to know you're ready for what comes next." "What do you mean?" "Marcus will try to paint himself as the victim. We'll tell everyone you drove him away, that you were cold, difficult, impossible to please. He'll make you the villain in his story. Are you prepared for that?" Claire thought about years of being overlooked, erased, made to feel grateful for scraps of attention. Thought about losing a child alone while her husband celebrated with his mistress. "Let him say what he wants," she replied. "I know what's true. The people who matter will believe me. The rest don't matter." Her father smiled, actually smiled. "There's my girl, I was worried I'd lost you." "You almost did," Claire admitted, "but I'm back now." "Good," he said, "because when this hits, you'll need to be strong. The Bennett family won't go quietly. Patricia will wage war. Marcus will play victim. You need to be prepared to stand alone." "I won't be alone," Claire said. "I have you, and Mom, and Richard, and friends I forgot I had, and myself. Most importantly, I have myself back." Her father reached across his desk and squeezed her hand. "Then do what needs to be done and don't apologize for it." The divorce papers were filed on a Tuesday. Claire had timed it perfectly. Marcus was scheduled to give a keynote at a medical conference. The practice had 3 major consultations booked. Patricia was hosting a charity luncheon. The Bennetts were at the height of their social visibility. The papers were served at his office at 9 a.m. By 10, his lawyer had called Richard screaming about blindsiding him. By 11, Marcus had called Claire 17 times. She answered none of them. By noon, the local legal community knew. Medical community by 1. Social circle by 2. The details were devastating. The filing outlined 7 years of financial abuse, detailed how Claire's inheritance had funded Marcus's entire career while she received nothing in return. Listed every asset purchased with Whitmore money, every investment made with Whitmore credit, every door opened with Whitmore connections. It documented the affair with Natalie, included the pregnancy, referenced Claire's miscarriage with medical records showing the exact date and time. The date and time Marcus had been at his mistress's apartment. The paperwork requested division of all marital assets with particular attention to what Claire had contributed versus what Marcus had earned independently. The numbers were brutal. Of the practice's $2 million valuation, Claire's money had provided $1.7 million. The house was hers. The investments were hers. The retirement accounts they'd built were 80% hers. Marcus had the career she'd funded and the reputation she'd helped build. She wanted compensation for both. The response was immediate and exactly what Claire had predicted. Marcus showed up at the house at 7 p.m. Claire had changed the locks that afternoon. He pounded on the door until Mr. Chen threatened to call the police. "Claire, open this door right now. We need to talk about this." She opened it, stood in the doorway, didn't invite him in. "There's nothing to talk about." "Nothing to talk about? You filed for divorce without even discussing it with me." "What the hell, Claire? The same way you had an affair without discussing it with me? That kind of without discussing?" His face flushed. "It was a mistake. One mistake. Are you really going to throw away 7 years over one mistake? Marcus, she's 4 months pregnant. That's not one mistake. That's dozens of mistakes over many months. And honestly, the affair isn't even the worst part. Then what is? The fact that you let me lose our baby alone, that I was bleeding and scared and calling you, and you couldn't be bothered to answer because you were with her, that you came home that night and showered and went to bed without once noticing I'd been through hell. That's the worst part. Not that you stopped loving me, but that you stopped seeing me as human. Something in his face changed. What, baby? And there it was, the moment he realized he'd missed something crucial. I was pregnant, for about 5 weeks before I miscarried. You never knew because you never paid attention. And when I needed you most, you were choosing nursery colors with your mistress. Marcus stumbled back like she'd hit him. Claire, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If I'd known... If you'd known what? You'd have pretended to care? Marcus, that's the problem. I had to almost die for you to notice I existed. And even then you didn't notice. So no, there's nothing to discuss. Sign the papers, take what's fair, which is very little, and move on. Patricia arrived next morning. Didn't knock. Used the key Claire hadn't known she had. Found Claire in the kitchen having coffee. This is unacceptable, Patricia announced. No greeting, no preamble. Good morning to you too, Patricia. Don't be cute. Do you have any idea what you've done? The humiliation, the scandal. People are talking. Important people. You're destroying Marcus's reputation. He destroyed his own reputation when he got his office manager pregnant while married to me. Men make mistakes. That's no reason to... To what? To expect basic respect. To want a partner who remembers I exist. Patricia, with all due respect, which is none, your son spent 7 years using me as a bank and a prop. I'm done. You selfish little bitch. We welcomed you into this family. Gave you everything. I gave you everything. My money. My connections, my time, my effort. I made Marcus's career possible, and in return I got loneliness and betrayal, and a mother-in-law who's never once treated me like family. So please, spare me the lecture about gratitude. Patricia's face went white, then red. When this goes to court, we will destroy you. We have resources, connections. You'll wish you'd stayed quiet like a good wife should. Claire smiled, actually smiled. Patricia, my family built this town. Your connections are my connections. Your resources come from what Marcus built with my money. You have nothing I don't have more of. Now get out of my house. For the first time in 7 years, Patricia Bennett had nothing to say. She left. The door closed. Claire's hands shook so badly she had to set down her coffee cup. But she'd done it. Stood up, spoke back, refused to be small. It felt terrifying. It felt like being born. The custody battle over assets dragged on for weeks. Marcus tried every strategy. Claimed Claire had been emotionally abusive, that she'd driven him into Natalie's arms with her coldness, that she'd refused to have children, conveniently forgetting he'd been the one cancelling fertility appointments. His lawyer painted her as a spoiled rich girl who'd trapped him into marriage and was now punishing him for finding real love. The strategy might have worked, except Richard had evidence. Texts from Marcus to friends joking about marrying Claire for money. Emails discussing how to maximize her trust fund contributions. Recorded conversations where he'd mocked her to colleagues. And the medical records, the miscarriage, the dates and times that proved exactly where Marcus had been when his wife needed him. The narrative collapsed. Marcus's lawyer advised settlement. Marcus refused, wanted his day in court, wanted to defend himself publicly. Got his wish. The trial lasted 3 days. Claire sat in the gallery and watched Marcus paint himself as a victim, watched Natalie testify that he'd told her his marriage was over, watched Patricia sob dramatically about her poor son being taken advantage of. And then Richard put Claire on the stand, asked her to tell her story. All of it. 7 years of diminishing, of being overlooked, of funding a dream that had no room for her, of losing a child alone while her husband was with another woman. She didn't cry, just spoke clearly, honestly. Let the facts speak for themselves. The judge was a woman in her 60s. She'd heard 10,000 divorce cases, probably hated them all. But something in her face changed as Claire testified. When Marcus's lawyer tried to cross-examine, tried to make Claire seem vindictive, the judge actually interrupted. "Counsel, the record is clear. Mrs. Bennet funded her husband's entire career while receiving no recognition and minimal affection. He had an affair that resulted in pregnancy. She suffered a miscarriage while he was with his mistress. What exactly are you hoping to establish here?" Marcus's lawyer had nothing. The ruling came fast. Claire received the house, 70% of all marital assets, and ongoing spousal support tied to the practice's earnings. Marcus kept the practice, but only because he'd have to work to pay her. The baby with Natalie would be his financial responsibility. The life he'd tried to build with her would be funded by the wife he'd discarded. The poetic justice wasn't lost on anyone. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Small-town news, but news nonetheless. Marcus tried to make a statement about moving forward and forgiving Claire's vindictiveness. Claire walked past without comment. Let him perform for the cameras. Let him play victim. She knew the truth. So did everyone else. 3 months later, she signed the final decree. Officially became Claire Whitmore again. Dropped the Bennet name like the burden it had always been. Marcus sent flowers, a card saying he'd always love her, that he hoped someday she'd forgive him. She threw them in the trash without reading past the first line. Claire didn't rebuild her life. She built a new one, better one. She took the settlement money and invested in women-owned businesses, sat on boards for domestic violence prevention, used her voice for women who'd lost theirs. She traveled. Not expensive trips to prove anything, just places she wanted to see. Coffee in Paris cafes, markets in Morocco, temples in Japan. She discovered she liked being alone, liked answering to no one, liked making decisions based on what she wanted instead of what would inconvenience someone else least. Sophie and Emma and Jade became her chosen family. They celebrated her birthday a year after the divorce with champagne and karaoke, and the kind of laughing that only comes from surviving something that should have broken you. "To Claire," Emma toasted, "who reminded us all that being alone is better than being invisible." They drank. Claire felt full, saw Marcus occasionally. Small town, impossible not to. He looked tired, older. Natalie had left him 6 months after the baby was born. Turns out being a